Welcome to Insights in Action, everybody. I am here today with Wes Webb of Locomotion Creative. Wes, how's it going?
Pretty good, Shib. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I would love to start, just kind of jump right into it. I'd love to understand a little bit more about you, Wes, and a little bit more about Locomotion Creative.
Sure. So I have had kind of an interesting past here. I moved to Nashville, Tennessee just over 10 years ago and found a job with Locomotion pretty much out of the gates. They were really cool about actually, let me start over. But getting a little ahead of my so I moved to Nashville, Tennessee about 10 years ago and cold called Locomotion because they seemed to be a cool agency that was doing interesting things. And come to find out, the previous owner, the founder of the company, Habib, had a policy of saying yes to every cold call interview. He just wanted to know people and make them feel welcome and just get to know as big a network as he could. And that was kind of his thing. And so we had this great conversation and I got the offer and I was with them for about 5 years. And it was just an incredible growing opportunity to really learn the ins and outs of a mid-sized agency. I've been in studios and small startups for most of my career. This was really the first time that I've gotten to see how a real agency works. There were some things that I felt like I still needed to accomplish in my career, though, that I wasn't going to be able to get at Locomotion. And so I decided to leave after 5 years and go into the corporate space. And I started working with a large tech corporation doing graphic design and these sorts of things. Ended up leading a team on generative AI integration and strategy. And that was really interesting. But some things that the company started going sideways. And I decided, you know what? I need to look at something else. And at that time, there were some leadership changes at Locomotion. The original founder, Habib, decided to retire finally. And his sort of art director took over the company and she gave me a call. It's like, hey, do you want to come back? And I thought, you know what? I absolutely do. So I'm now on my second stint at Locomotion and I just hit 6 months for the second time. So it's been pretty awesome so far. But like I said, we're a mid-sized agency. We focus on mostly sort of regional clients, and it's every line of business you can think of. So we're doing everything from healthcare to higher education to B2B, B2C, anything that we can get our hands on and to where the fit feels right for us.
That's cool. Wow, what an interesting story. I mean, you cold called and you just happened to find the one own agency owner who's like, hey, yeah, I say yes to every cold call. That's this thing. And a lot of people wouldn't do that. A lot of people wouldn't go cold call. They'd stick to that LinkedIn or job boards to try to find a job. So I think it's really cool that you're just like, hey, let me just see what I could get and that it worked out like this.
Yeah, it was neat. They've done a really good job of creating a a great community here, not just in the company, but with our other firms and other clients and this sort of thing. We seem to exist in this really interesting space where we're not like a small startup agency and we're not the agency of record sort of thing. And so we can kind of float in between them and we end up collaborating with both sides a lot.
Yeah.
We'll be using smaller, even freelancers to kind of help offset some of our deficiencies. And then other times we'll be working with large agencies of record to be kind of production artists or to help out with larger aspects of the design where they might be focused more on media buys and television sort of things. We can focus on the print and digital and kind of help along or kind of work in harmony with their strengths as well.
That's awesome. And I want to talk a little bit more about that print and design. And I know that
Sure.
creative focuses on a variety of areas, like you said, digital branding and publication design. I mean, how do you ensure that the creative work that you produce across these like diverse mediums stays cohesive and aligned with a client's brand identity?
Yeah. So the way we kind of describe ourselves is we're a bunch of freelancers that all work together. So our office we're about 12 to 15 people, depending on how many interns we might have at the moment. And we've got a very collaborative sort of environment. There's not any sort of real hierarchy here. Everybody's kind of on the same level. If you look at our org chart, it's kind of the owner and everyone. And we all kind of have our own strengths and roles, but it's not that it's sort of art director, senior designer, junior designer, this sort of thing where you can start to get into these sort of weird silos and end up losing communication with clients and these sorts of things. We all kind of have our own suite of clients, if you will. And we are all communicating all the time and we're constantly bouncing things off of each other and pushing things forward. So while some person might be focusing on one higher ed client while another person's working on a convenience store, those two will end up talking to each other and sharing ideas and collaborating. And it kind of helps keep everything moving forward and you kind of have that almost accountability, so to speak, in there that can keep things on track. So many times I think we get buried in the client work where you might lose sight of something really obvious, and to have somebody with that outside perspective able to come in and say, "Hey, did you think about this?" Or "That seems weird." And then you're like, "I didn't even notice that. Oh my gosh." And it just works. It works really, really.
Yeah. And there's this thing with specialists. I mean, I've worked at quite a few agencies before, and there's this thing with when specialists are doing what they do, which is usually amazing work. You're right. There's this like, I can't see the forest from the trees because I'm so deep in it. So that's really, was that intentional, do you think, by your CEO to,
Absolutely.
oh, nice.
Yeah, there's a lot of socialist ideals, I think, in this company that I think work really, really well.
Mm.
It's been a really countercultural sort of experience, but
Yeah.
because of that, I think we're all able to move a little more efficient
Yeah.
than having to kind of fit into a particular bureaucracy or a workflow. We're just there to move forward. Now, that does mean finding the right fit for employees is quite difficult because you don't need specialists. You need generalists. You need somebody that can handle new clients as well as do the billing for those clients.
Mhm.
You need people that can manage their own traffic as well as kind of coordinate with subcontractors and even other teammates. So everyone here is kind of an art director and a production artist at the exact same time and everything in between.
Wow. That's a really interesting way to look at the agency. And it's completely different, I bet, from the corporate world.
Oh, absolutely.
And you returned, like you were saying, you returned to Locomotion after spending time in that corporate space. I mean, how has your time in the corporate world influenced your approach to creativity and client relationships at Locomotion?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I learned or that I took away from the corporate world was in the agency world or being a creative, I say we put our heart and soul into everything that we create. Just that's why we got into the business to begin with. And we can see because we have that tuned eye and that sense of taste, we can tell like when we're presenting good work. We just know it in our bones.
Right.
And then there's times where a client might say, "No, I think that's cool, but we need to be over in this. We need to stay in this side of things." And that is a less creative, maybe less impactful sort of a thing. And I was always like, "Why are you doing this? Like, why can't you see that like the good work will bring along what you're looking for?" But things that I started learning from the corporate side is sometimes decisions are being made not because the work is good, but because they have to produce a certain ROI, they have to produce a certain impact. And there are proven sort of metrics that are safeguarded by the bean counters, if you will, that artists just don't have access to. And so I was given access at certain points along those corporate projects to see and collaborate with the more financial minded people, with the more legal minded people. And I've started to unravel this mystery in my own head of like, why can't you get out of your own way? And oh, sometimes you have to justify the business purpose and not just the aesthetic
Yeah.
beauty of something.
That's really interesting. Being given that access as a creative, and I think creative people in agencies, they do amazing work, right? But there is that I've seen it myself where there's this like a little bit of butting heads where it's like the creator's like, well, I want to do this. And the other person, and maybe the CEO is like, well, that doesn't make business sense. So it's really, there's this intentional action by your team and you to be like, well, let's go start talking to these other people that see the same thing in different ways, right?
And what that's given to me now is I'm still creating beautiful things and
Yeah.
I still love doing that, but don't stop there anymore.
Yeah.
Now I'm always looking for the business justification for a beautiful and figuring out ways to phrase a particular pitch. So then someone who is not aesthetically minded can get on board because it is reaching them on a level that they understand. And then they're more apt to come along with me for the aesthetic portion of the journey.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think a big part of this is really creating or building trust with clients, like having the creative, but also justifying it financially. And I know that off camera, you mentioned the importance of building trust with clients to put their best interests at the forefront of every design decision. And I guess I was curious, I mean, how do you foster that trust, especially with clients who might not fully understand the design process?
Yeah, I think it comes down to communication. And that sounds really kind of pedestrian and obvious, but I think one of the things that can be difficult for creatives is being able to translate their ideas and their methodology into a thing that someone outside of that world can understand. Yeah, I was blessed to actually grow up in a family with no creatives in it. I've got military officers, I've got journalists, teachers, I've got all these types of people in my family. And so when I came along wanting to make sculpture and do illustrations and graphic design and these sorts of things, I had to find ways to communicate with my family what it is I was doing. And at first they never understood. And then I started getting better at it, figuring out, okay, they don't care about this. They want to understand that. Let me focus on this, but then bring them over to here. And so I had that practice. And then I went to school and I decided to go to, or just said a pretty normal liberal arts college that had a great art program. So all of my roommates, I ended up living in a house with a bunch of guys. No one else was an art major. And so again, I had to figure out ways to communicate what I was doing in a way that normal people could understand. And I think not straying, if you will, has really helped me at least with my ability to kind of exist in these two worlds, exist in this highly aesthetic and conceptual place that I love living in, but also bringing that through joy and enthusiasm and clear communication to people that maybe don't understand that aesthetic world quite as much. So I think paying attention to the way that you communicate things and thinking not only about what you're trying to put across to your clients or your customers, but thinking about where are they coming from and how can I join them in that perspective to then help them see this more effectively, whatever it is.
Yeah. And I come from the complete opposite side of the agency world than you do. I come from the sales part of it. Uh, mainly where I started and continue to be. And that it's really interesting that it's the same thing. There's this whole like there's this thing when you I mean, I'm sure you've seen it in writing copy and in sales in general. It's what's in it for me. Like the prospect asks, what's in it for me? And so you or very unique experiences that led you to just automatically think that I think is really powerful for an agency thing. And it's this deep psychological sales principle that's timeless, right? And so, yeah, if there's any creatives out there that think that you don't need to know at least a little bit of sales, even in your job, it's not true. You definitely need to
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. Go hang out with the sales guys. You'll learn a ton.
Yeah. Cool. And I know that Locomotion, we talked a little bit about this, but Locomotion works across a variety of industries. And you mentioned from healthcare to CPG. How do you tailor your creative approach while working with industries that have such different audiences and messaging needs?
So I have ADHD, which means I love learning things as fast as possible. And one of my favorite things to do is do deep dives, get in my hyper focus mode and just like absorb as much as I can, whether I understand it or not.
Yeah.
And so that to me is like the biggest high is like getting into a completely new industry that I know nothing about and then becoming a subject matter expert as quickly as possible. And then kind of in that same sort of sense, like being able to then take what I've learned and then bring along the team that I put together to help me work on the work. That old adage of the teacher usually gets more out of the lesson than the student. It helps me to then distill that information that I've taken, learn, get it out to my team, get us moving on the same page, and then moving forward. And then it's a lot of just clear and honest communication with our clients, making sure that we both understand what our roles are, where we're going to help each other out along the way, and making sure that they understand that this isn't just an order something and then we'll get back to you. Like this is going to be a process. This is going to be a conversation throughout the entire course of the project.
Yeah. I also have ADHD and I also really love learning new things and diving deep. I guess I just for my own personal edification, I was really curious. The way that I learn new things is like complete immersion. Like I'm like, okay, this is what and I'm fully into it no matter what. I was curious as if or if you had your own process as to where you have like this is how I learn about new industries or learn new things.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a lot of different stuff. It's first asking the right questions,
Mhm.
making sure that I've got at least a sort of 30,000 foot view of what the client is doing and how they tend to work. I'm working with a financial sort of client right now. I still have difficulty really describing what they do, but being able to learn kind of through conversation and context a few things and then going and finding kind of competitors and even watching YouTube videos. Like I pulled out a series of YouTube videos on a different client and just started getting into you'll understand why I'm jazzed about this. Like there was a different client I was working on that was doing computational biology. And I'm like, cool. I'm just going to go watch a bunch of like lectures on computational biology because I got to understand what that means and why is that unique? Because I'm not going to just go draw like a leaf with a computer chip on it or something. I want to understand the soul of this industry or with these financial people. Like I want to understand like, why do they all feel like they have to be navy blue and like have a capital letter in some sort of serif font? Like, what if we did something deeper than that, something more meaningful that would help them tell a unique story rather than just looking and feeling like all of the competitors?
That's really cool. It's I love hearing people on the creative side talk because you guys notice these things that like are just everyday things that we don't notice, you know what I mean? Or I wouldn't consider myself like on that end of creativity. And so like, as you're talking, I'm like thinking of all the fine companies in the financial industry that do have that's a very specific shade of blue. So it's really interesting. You can notice patterns like that as a creative person. You just have this unique ability to be able to just find something that sticks out. And a lot of times, with a little bit of iteration, a little bit of testing, it does end up working just to be able to think a little bit differently, which is really cool. Um, yeah. And so creativity is clearly a key part of what drives you. What do you think is the key to balancing passion and creativity while keeping egos in check during the design process?
Ooh, man, that has been the journey I've been on. So I've been doing this now professionally for about 20 years. And there were early conversations, early feedback sessions, clients and art directors and otherwise that I felt the feedback was a personal attack.
Ooh,
And again, we're putting our heart and soul into this work. And when you bury yourself like that, and it comes back for you can't help but feel like they're talking about me, not this thing that I made. And I think every designer, every creative, I don't care if you're a songwriter on Broadway here in Nashville, or if you're a graphic designer at a big agency in New York, like you're putting yourself out, and to feel that sort of either acceptance or rejection, like that's something you have to deal with on a personal level. And so what I started realizing was, and what I had to keep telling myself was, this has nothing to do with me. This is not who I am. This is just something that I made. I looked at my brother, he's big in the financial world. He's a CFO for a small, actually it's a large communications company. And I was like, okay, how do you not feel the same way about like the stuff that you make? He's like, dude, it's just stuck. Like it's just a spreadsheet. Like it's not that big a deal. But I'm like, you spent as much time on that as I did this logo, but I feel this personal sort of connection to it. How do you disassociate on that? Because we're going to change it anyway. It doesn't even matter. Like it's going to keep moving and iterating. Like how can I need to have that perspective on my art? Like
yeah.
this is just a thing. This is me doing my best to give someone the means in which to do their business, or to push their company forward. And who is it for me to say like it's my heart and my soul? Like it's my ability.
Yeah.
But as soon as I started to remove my personal identity from it and be able to try to take that step back, I felt my work got stronger because I wasn't so emotionally invested. And my passion was still there. I still love doing. But as soon as I can take that sort of clearer line between this is my person and this is my work, it all got easier. Now, now put all of that into very other creative things like my music and my sculpture, and I keep those very close and don't let anyone bother me in those processes and outcomes. But I think with graphic design and with the work that I do there, I'm able to kind of offer it more freely because I've been able to kind of take that emotion step back.
That's wonderful. I mean, I think one of the big things is detachment, right? And detachment is key. And it's this old Buddhist principle, old Hindu spiritual principle that like, hey, be not attached to the fruits of your labor. And unfortunately, the only real way to learn detachment like that is through rejection. But you learn through the salesperson. If you're not putting nearly as much time as into one thing as a salesperson, but you are doing those like cold calls and all of that stuff to where you're like, like if you get detached, or if you're attached to a yes or a no every single time, you're gonna burn out really quickly. And so
Absolutely.
one of those things that you just have to go through, no matter where you are in life, to be like, okay, I have to accept and welcome rejection so that I can learn this like invaluable skill of detachment. So
And on that, I will say working for the right people and with the right people can be a huge help in that. Knowing where I stand professionally in the eyes of my boss or the owner of the company allows me to deal with that rejection even better, because I know that even though I might have missed the mark for this one client, I know it's not shaking the confidence my boss has in.
yeah,
And that relationship means so much more than a paycheck.
yeah,
And I've started to make decisions in my career around making sure those relationships are best. And that's why I came back to Locomotion, to be completely honest, was I wanted to be at a place where with people that I trust, with people that trust me, and we both have each other's best interests at heart, because then we're going to go and do better work because of it.
yeah. That's wonderful. And exactly, having a strong team behind you that always believes in you, it helps with all of the other BS that you deal with all day. So that's cool.
Absolutely.
We've talked a little bit about the past. We've talked about the present a lot, and I think that's amazing. And for this last question for today, I want to talk a little bit about the future. With your deep experience in both branding and traditional print design, How do you see the role of print evolving in today's increasingly digital marketing landscape?
It's it's kind of interesting. I kind of feel like print is going to be going the way of vinyl, where it will get fewer and further between, but the opportunities to do it are going to get more special. I've had I've done projects where my wife is an architect, and there's a term in architecture called value engineer. It's where you start cutting corners and reducing the overall cost in the project. And I feel like that's a great term for graphic design that I never heard. We end up value engineering our projects to death, and it's usually in paper choice and print techniques and binding methods and all of these sorts of things, because they have to print so many of these direct mail pieces or whatever it might be that we can't actually spend the money on it. But what we're seeing is people would rather do a smaller run of something more special and more targeted and more impactful, and therefore are willing to spend a little bit more or investigate a new method of thinking than they would have otherwise. Because I think that just the general approach is different now. And I think that's a really special sort of moment. And I think as designers, if we can kind of continue to push our clients and build those trust moments along the way, when we suggest doing something in a specialty paper or a particular binding method or with a cool die cut or something, with that trust involved and us showing results across the board, we're able to kind of guide clients into making these more special experiences. And like I said, like buying a 12-inch vinyl instead of streaming a bunch of music, because it's this special moment that you want to keep with you.
Wow, that's wonderful. I think you're right. That human need for something authentic is never going to change. The mediums might change, but there's that need for authenticity within. I mean, I don't want to overgeneralize, but I would say within most people or almost everybody that there's that need. And so that is a timeless principle that will never change. Wes, this has been wonderful. I feel like I learned a lot. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Where can people find out more about you? Where can people find out more about Locomotion Creatives?
Yeah. So you could go to our website, locomotioncreative.com. You can see a ton of our work there. We've got the special problem of working in so many different industries that it's quite a big site. But there's a lot of work on there for a lot of years. But you can find us there. We don't have a ton of social media preference, but again, looking at the future, that's one of the things that I've been trying to kind of build up again as I've come back. We're out there. We're here in Nashville. Come by. We still have that open door policy. We love talking to people. We love meeting people and getting to know other creative in the Nashville area. So if you're ever in the 615, come hey yeah. And then me personally, I am Wes Webb. That's it. I am weswebb.com. It's on Instagram. You can find me on Spotify. Put out a bunch of ambient electronic music these days and just vibing all the time. And yeah, there's a lot rattling around.
Yeah. Yeah. And everything will be posted in the show notes, all the links to the website, Wes's website, and then also Wes's Spotify. So Wes, thank you again so much for your time. This has been awesome.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.